Former leader of the far-right extremist group, the Proud Boys, has pleaded guilty to seditious conspiracy in connection with the January 6th riot. Jeremy Bertino of North Carolina is the first member of the group to plead guilty in connection with last year's attack on the Capitol. He has agreed to fully cooperate with prosecutors. 5 other members of the group, including the group's founder, Enrique Tarrio, were indicted on similar charges in June and are awaiting a December trial under sentencing guidelines. Bertino faces up to 63 months in prison. Joe, this is a big headline on a number of levels. You have members of the Oath Keepers facing charges. We haven't seen charges like this yet in the January 6th legal proceedings, and this is a guilty plea.
This is a big deal, and it's a big deal for several reasons. Let's bring Ken back in here, Ken Delaney. And big deal, first of all, because it's very hard to prove seditious conspiracy, even though when we looked at the videos the day after, January the 6th, I was saying on air, it seemed a lot of people could have been charged with seditious conspiracy, but it's obviously much harder than that. But we have a plea deal here. Do we have any evidence that he's turning state's evidence against some of the others that were with him in that conspiracy?
Yes, Joe, he has agreed to fully cooperate, and he is charged in a conspiracy with 5 other Proud Boys. So he's the first Proud Boy to plead guilty to seditious conspiracy. And that's hugely important because that means he can go to that trial in December and testify against his fellow Proud Boys about exactly what they were planning. And as we've seen from this Oath Keeper trial, they don't just rely on the testimony of witnesses. They have a massive trove of communications, text messages, recorded phone calls that sort of indicts the defendants in their own words about what exactly they wanted to do. I mean, we're only 3 days into this month-long Oath Keepers trial, and already we've heard Stuart Rhodes on tape talking about, that his only regret was that the Capitol attackers didn't bring guns. And another defendant, Thomas Caldwell, saying that they would have killed 100 politicians if they had guns at the Capitol. So, and then we've had this parade of witnesses of former Oath Keepers in this trial talking about how they were growing increasingly troubled as this group essentially made clear it wanted to go to war with the U.S. government. So that's the Oath Keepers trial. I think we can expect exactly the same thing in the Proud Boys trial. It's really remarkable how much evidence the government has gathered. The big question, of course, is will we learn anything about any connections between these far-right extremist groups and their alleged seditious conspiracies and members of the Trump inner circle who are clearly egging all this on? That remains to be seen. But it's clear the DOJ has powerful evidence against these groups.
Ken, you took my question away from me. Do you think this guy, the guy who's now turned in some ways in favor of the prosecution, will he give us more insight into the relationship between these organizations and the Trump administration? I mean, this guy has said he's guilty of seditious conspiracy. I mean, what does this mean in so many ways in terms of how we might think about the Trump administration and its relationship to all of this?
It's a great question, Eddie. We just don't know. I mean, we don't know what sort of insights this Jeremy Bertino has into the inner workings of the Proud Boys at the highest level. And we don't know what evidence exists. We know there were secret meetings in parking garages and various phone calls. And, the Oath Keepers, for example, were providing security for Roger Stone, obviously a confidant of Donald Trump. But I think that's the big question in all these cases and in the January 6th investigation writ large. I mean, it's not the only question, because obviously there's so much that Donald Trump and his inner circle is alleged to have done outside of directly instigating the violence that sort of led up to the violence. And we've seen all that in the January 6th hearings. But this question of were they in direct touch with these far-right groups that were clearly planning, or allegedly clearly planning, seditious conspiracies, that's an unanswered question that perhaps these trials will answer and perhaps they won't.
Ken, so we got the Oath Keepers over here and we got the Proud Boys over there. Is there any evidence or indication that they were in touch with each other? That in fact we're talking about one large organized group between these two, or were they on completely separate tracks heading for the same goal?
Another great question, Eugene. So the government has not alleged that they were working together. These are separate cases, but there's that famous parking garage meeting that we've all seen the video of where the leaders were together. I'm not the expert on this. My colleague Ryan Riley has been spending his entire career in recent years digging into January 6th, and he knows all the ins and the outs of this. So there was some evidence of communication between those groups, and I think it's unknown at this point how deep that goes, but the government hasn't alleged it in court papers.